Well, welcome everyone. And today we're having a panel and a really an opportunity to discuss a very important topic, which is recruiting and supporting underrepresented minority students, PhD students. And so this is, again, Center for Engineering Mechanobiology. We are NSF Science and Technology Center funded by NSF. And this is very important to us. And again, I just want to describe a little bit for those in the audience who are not familiar and online, familiar with who we are. We are a multi-institution center. Our partner institutions are across the country. We have small, we have large universities, we have HBCUs, minority serving institutions. So quite a mix of institutions, again, led by the University of Pennsylvania and our directors here, Dr. Shenoy. And so really with the Science and Technology Center, the NSF, a very important part of it is the training of the next generation of scientific leaders. And also a big part of that is broadening their participation. So diversity is very important to us. We have a large number of programs that are really driven to support that aim, which is, again, the pipeline, increasing the numbers of students through this pipeline of activities, K through 12, undergrad, postdoc, graduate. But we can always do better. There's continuous improvement, and this is really the goal today of this panel discussion. And so it's for us to learn, and those and everyone else outside of our center to also learn for our guests here online and in person. I just want to bring your attention here on some statistics. Again, this is our national statistics from the NSF. And so you can see here, again, underrepresented groups, the underrepresented minorities here, quite low in, again, the numbers that are receiving PhDs in whether it's physical sciences or engineering. And so we need to do better. And so it's an opportunity here to learn. And so I have great panelists today, and how it's going to work is we're going to have them each are going to give talks, and for about a few minutes, 10 minutes each roughly. So hold your questions and until they finish, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. So our first guest is Amy Landis. She's online. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it in person because of the storms and things, and so she's here virtually. And Amy Landis is the Mines Presidential Faculty Fellow for Access, Attainment, and Diversity. She's professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Colorado School of Mines. And so, Amy, you should be able to.
Yeah. Hello. Thanks, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm so sorry I can't make it in person. But that storm apparently was wreaking havoc on everyone. You can go to the next slide. So my position at Mines is the equivalent of a Chief Diversity Officer or a VP for DEI at your university. I report directly to the president. So I'm going to talk to you about admissions and recruitment from an institutional perspective and how we support departments and centers like yours. I do want to note that I'm really speaking, there's so much to cover, right? I decided to focus on admissions and recruitment because I can easily talk for an hour on that, and not so much the support and inclusive culture that we try to cultivate once students get to Mines. So there's a lot of work there, but let's just sort of scope it for this talk about admissions and recruitment. So these are sort of the three things that I think about for our university, and I ask our departments to think about. And I'll go through them in a little more detail on each slide. So if you go to the next one, and you can click one more. So data is really important for us at Mines. It should be important for you. If you don't understand the pool, so you saw, we have only about 12% of underrepresented minority folks getting PhDs and about 26% of women getting PhDs in the United States. If you don't understand that context, and then you don't understand what your applicants look like, what your pool of students look like, you really don't have anything, driving your decisions. You need to know this data. So what we do from an institutional perspective is we make sure that we provide this data to everyone on campus who are making these decisions. So We look at stuff like for applications, who applies, who gets admitted, of who's admitted, then who decides to say yes to us, who comes, what are the demographics of those folks. And we look at the demographics in more slices than what you see here. This is just a snapshot of what we show, what we make available. In addition, so this bullet down here, the last bullet, I don't know what systems you all use, but we make sure that every grad committee has access to Tableau and of course Slate. Slate's the system where they can see the applications, but they also can get data on the applications in Slate in the pool. And so we want to make sure that real time and historically speaking, all those committees can have access to the data for their pools and pull it immediately. So Tableau allows them to see the historical data and reports. We give them things like, what are we paying the students? What are you paying the students? How do you compare to all the other departments? How are you doing as you're moving through the admissions process with your students? So making sure that those people who are making the decisions have access to this data is really important for us, because if we don't know, right, that one department is well under some of our goals, like we want to be at minimum, we want to be enrolling, see we're at 10% last year for underrepresented students. We want to be enrolling at least the national average, which as we saw earlier is 12%. This is dated. Because we've been working on this for so long, we're up this past year and we're looking forward to 23 admits and enrolls. We're up in the 20% for underrepresented students. We're really proud of that work. And it's because we've done all this work building our pipeline, making sure that we're minimizing bias in the process, reducing barriers. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we wouldn't know how well we were doing. We wouldn't know which programs and departments needed more help if we weren't monitoring this data. So if you could click next. And go ahead and click one more time. So I'll say this many times throughout this presentation, you need to evaluate your process. You should think about, do you have pipeline schools or programs? In particular with this center, you have partners, strong partnerships, and what are you doing to leverage those partnerships? We also do at Minds surveys of the folks who are applying to us. We want to understand what gets them to yes, what gets them to apply. We monitor the completions in our system. We actually found in 2021 that we had a number of students who started an application and weren't completing it. And those numbers were higher for underrepresented students than other students. And so when you know that information, you can go in and do things to encourage them to apply. Maybe you ask, is it too costly? Because when you get to the end is when we ask you to pay. Are there other barriers? What can we do to reduce those barriers and encourage you to finish your application? So that's, again, really important to monitor your data and then using that data set goals. What are your goals for your department, for your center? Are you trying to do better than the national averages? Do you have a sense of what's feasible given your pipeline schools? So set those goals. Next slide. You can click one more time. So as you're evaluating your process, these are the two things we ask everyone to think about is, are there ways to eliminate bias? And are there ways to eliminate barriers? So at Minds, we have a workshop for everyone who's on our grad committees on how to minimize and reduce bias in the applicant review process. You can click next. As part of that workshop, we have developed rubrics for folks. And rubrics are one of many ways to minimize bias in the process. It helps people evaluate applications and students and interviews on a consistent scale, right? And it makes you think about how are you scoring folks. You also need to think about your process. We use inter-rater reliability measures when we have so many applications that not the same people are able to review the applications. You want to give all of the applicants a fair shake. And so we do go through a process to help all the people reviewing the applications be consistent. Because you can imagine how you might have, if you've got faculty and then a staff and then a different faculty member reviewing your applications, and they're each not doing the same ones. If you haven't talked about how to make sure that we're evaluating consistently, some people might value some things differently and therefore then score your applicants differently. So it's really important to understand the process and determine if you need to do these types of interventions to minimize and eliminate bias. Next. And one more. The other thing that we try to talk about in our workshop is to expand the things that we think are valuable, because those of us who are in STEM now tend to be in majority groups, and we have a specific set of things that we've been trained culturally, both culturally in STEM and in our culture, to value as valuable experiences. And we try to talk to folks about ways that you can expand what you might value in an application. Not everyone has a chance to engage in a lot of research or publish before they've applied to a PhD program. And so what are other things that can be valuable? You can click next. The other thing we talk about as we evaluate the process, and one more, is to eliminate barriers. So are you requiring the GRE still? What are your costs to apply? You could click next 2 more times. We know that the GRE is biased, it's costly, and it's a poor predictor of academic success. Do you need the GRE? What happens if the GRE is optional? And then how does that impact the applicant review process? All of these things are things to think about, and that we are working with our departments. We at Mines haven't said across the board we're eliminating GREs, but we've convinced many departments that it's not necessary anymore. We have a lot of departments where we don't require any GRE, and many where it's optional. So I'd encourage you to think about those things. Click one more time. Again, I'll end this one with evaluate the process. What are you doing? Where are places where bias or barriers might crop up? And really think about that. Are those barriers necessary? Are you doing things consistently? How do people get in touch with you? How are they getting excited about your program? And I say here in this bullet, it's individual contact required. Does a student have to reach out to one particular faculty member? And when they do, are you sure that the responses are consistent, that they're always being encouraged to apply and to reach out to other folks that they might work with? Next, please. You can go through, make all these pop up because I know I'm about at time. The last thing I want to encourage you to do is, collaborate and communicate. There's so much research that shows that our undergraduate admissions teams at all of our universities are doing a fantastic job. They have access to software and data sets that tell us, likelihood of students who are going to, deposit and enroll at our universities. And so having your graduate admissions teams work with your undergraduate admissions and enrollment management team helps them learn a ton, gives them access to the stuff that your university is already paying for to help you understand how to target different students for your grad programs. We tell all of our faculty all the time, you're always recruiting. You're always recruiting for new faculty, you're always recruiting for new grad students, you're always recruiting for new undergraduate students. Make it a mindset. And we give folks a set of PowerPoint slides. They're not a lot, but they're short, so that they can, anytime they're talking anywhere, promote Mines. Promote Mines as a great place to work. Promote Mines as a great place to go get your graduate degree. We have consistent talking points. There are 5 things that we hope everybody knows that we always say about why people come to Mines and why they're successful. And so having that consistent messaging, having folks remember and know that we're always recruiting and they're part of that process, that it's not just the people on the graduate admissions committee or that faculty search committee. It really helps us improve our outreach. The last couple of things I'll say is we have been very purposeful about knowing, like those 5 talking points, what makes us attractive to folks. And we really do a solid job communicating that out to our prospective students. And so I'd ask you, what do you have that you think makes you attractive to students? Is it something professional development related? Is it a mentoring program, some sort of unique opportunities? You have to do those things these days for students to be interested. They're looking for a whole experience, not just, one singular experience in a lab. They're looking to do more. We also do bridge to doctorate programs and other things that get potential prospective PhD students to our campus. Again, the data, it's all about the data. The data has told us that students are 60% more likely to say yes to us if they've been on campus or had a previous experience with us. So we know then if we're getting them somehow on campus, whether it's a summer RU or bridge to doctorate, or even just some sort of conference or camp, they're more likely to be interested and commit to us in the long term. So I encourage you to think about those sorts of things. And as you're experimenting, track the data so that you know what's working and what's not. I think that's all I have.
And thank you, Amy. The next speaker is Manu Platt. Like I said, we're giving different perspectives. Amy gave you perspective more at the institutional level. Now, Manu Platt is going to give you a little more perspective from a department level. And so Manu Platt is a professor, Coulter Department of Biomedical Engineering at Georgia Tech and Emory University, the Wallace H. Coulter Distinguished Faculty Fellow. He's the director of GT-ESTEEMED and a director of Project Engaged. Manu.
Great, thank you for having me, everyone. Let me get the timer. Great, so greetings from Atlanta. As she mentioned, and I was also the former diversity director for 2 NSF centers for an STC and an ERC. So we can talk about that if you care about it later. But right, I'm going to give you some strategies to address racism and recruitment, retention, and reputation. And I'm glad to come behind Amy because there's some parts I was not going to talk about with the holistic review of the applications that I don't have to. I am a professor who does research. I do have to tell people that because as a Black person who does diversity work, people think I don't run a research lab, but I still do. So you can check me out there. We can talk about that later. Georgia Tech Biomedical Engineering program, we are the #2 department in the country. We have been for several years. We are also the largest department of biomedical engineering. So that's a benefit to us being highly ranked because we will get students that want to come to our institution, right? Which Penn also has that as a benefit. We're also in Atlanta. Black students love Atlanta. Black people like Philadelphia as well. So these are other advantages that maybe other institutions may not have to fight against. But so I was in missions recruiting, chair of admission and recruiting for my department for about 5 or 6 years before I moved up to be associate chair for grad studies. And I'll tell you about the successes I had so you can understand my street cred. So in 2016, that was my first year. I was just learning the ropes. I had been on the committee my entire time, but I was now in charge. So we had 3 Black students out of 24 in that incoming class and 5 Hispanic and Latino students. But then we began to overhaul things. So in 2017, year 2, 8 Black students out of 40 of an incoming class, 20% Black students. As mentioned by Amy, the Black population in the US is about 13%. We made offers to 10 Hispanic and Latinx students, but only 3 accepted. So there are differences and we had to think, how can we make sure we get the other groups? Year 3, again, 8 Black students and we upped it to 8 Hispanic and Latinx students. Again, greater 21% Black, 21% Hispanic Latinx. Oops. And then year 4, you can see the numbers. And year 5, we were also still able to retain those numbers. All right. And we are, again, let me remind you, by 2021, our numbers fell off a bit. That was after the George Floyd murder and all the other universities started to like swoon and recruit the Black and brown students to their departments. But we had been at it, so our numbers dropped a little bit. But again, reminder, we are the #2 department in the country, okay? And this is the numbers of how our students and our student population looks quite different. So how do we do it? So very explicitly, we had to address implicit bias in the application review process. Happy to discuss more about that. But the second point I think is more important is to be explicit about being anti-racist in the student and faculty candidate selections. I'm talking about this for grad school. It also can apply for your faculty pools as well. What does that mean, right? And you have to use your power. So orient your admissions hiring committee, as you just heard, and your entire faculty, because when they come to campus, they won't be talking to just the people you've trained. And we'll talk about how we realize that. But you must exercise oversight. If there's a review and there's one person who has said something crazy about a Black or brown student, you can't just like, well, all the scores get averaged together. No, use your power for good. And again, do not let students of color meet one-on-one with racist professors as much as you can help it. Because one bad experience, if some kid has fought their way up to make it to this point, why would I risk at this point mixing it up with you all? No. And then you hear people say, well, I don't know their heart. How do I know if they're racist? Ask a Black person. They'll tell you who the racist professors are. You want to know who the sexist professors are? Ask your women students. They will tell you. And you can save all of that by just asking a Black woman. So you can't see this because of the panel here. But Stacey Abrams had this quote talking about canaries in the coal mine. Black women have built nests in the coal mine. So they're able to cover all the bases if you want to know who are the people that put your recruitment numbers at risk. So I've identified, we're engineers here, there's 5 boundary conditions between you and the diverse class you want. First is getting talented, underrepresented students to apply. Amy mentioned this. There's a point in our department, we weren't even getting the applications. I was like, hey, how come I'm not reviewing them Black students? Oh, we only got 3 and they're all incomplete. Then after you get them to apply, you got to get them to accept, or your department to accept them into your program. Then once you did that happening, again, as Amy mentioned, then how do you get them to accept us and say they're going to come? Then once you get that, now what you need them to be accepted by professors into their labs. All of these are different barriers. And then you got to get them to pass the qualifying exam, and then you got to get them graduated. We're not here to talk about all of those pieces. So I'm going to start to talk about how do you get them to apply. So there are these myths that I've heard, and people say this to my face. I'm sure you've all heard them. There are none out there. We don't know where to find them, and they may not be prepared coming from those kinds of schools, meaning HBCUs or minority serving institutions. I'm a proud graduate of Morehouse College, an all-Black, all-male college in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am here. So we can bust these myths, all right? And I won't spend time on all of them, but how do you get them to apply to you? They're there. If you haven't seen them, go to these minority serving research conferences. Abercam, SOCNUS, ERN, NSBE, SHEP, they're all over the place, dressed up in suits, ready to talk about science and ready to be recruited, okay? Each of these conferences has at least 1,000, some of them have 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 students. And again, not just go and have a booth, but at these conferences where there are competitions, have your faculty serve as judges. So you are then interacting with the students on a one-on-one basis. They are seeing that you're a real person, but what is also done for my own faculty, they're like, wow, these students are so smart. Yeah. And that then changes their perspective when they come back to review applications. But again, I'm a proud graduate of an HBCU, and so think about them. I know you have one partner in your center, but there are actually 101 accredited HBCUs, public and private, and concentrated in about 19 states. And they enroll 300,000 students, approximately 80% that are African-American. And HBCUs punch above the weight. They enroll only 10% of African-American college students, but account for 17% of the bachelor's degrees. So they're failing out of other schools, but the HBCUs are graduating them. And 24% of all the STEM degrees earned, even though they contain 10% of African-Americans in college. So, but if you need some other big benefits of why HBCUs are amazing, again, they count for just 3% of four-year nonprofits, but HBCU alumni account for roughly 50% of professors at non-HBCUs. So they are training leaders that then come and take over. And you can see in this picture on the side, again, HBCU graduates are 75% of Black PhDs, 50% of Black engineers, 80% of Black federal judges, et cetera. But the most striking statistic is that there are 100% of Black women vice presidents, 100% of women vice presidents, 100% of Black vice presidents, and 100% of Southeast Asian vice presidents are all HBCU graduates. So let's crack that door open and go recruiting. So then the other piece I think I want to especially spend time on my last couple of minutes is getting talented underrepresented minority students to accept us. There was a time when we had 3 Black professors in our department, top ranked. No other department even had like 2. So we were like, oh, of course they're all going to come because they see us. No, we had 10 Black students invited, 0 came to join our department. That's when it became, what else are we missing? Because just having Black faculty, they were going to departments where there were 0 Black faculty. So it's just not that. So you have to think about, what is your reputation? What is the mindset of the faculty, students, and administration? How is that projected out? Are you like, we're so good and you want to be here? Or do you look welcoming and inviting? What statements are made in the admissions and hiring committee room? What statements are made at recruiting weekend? Because students hear people talking and saying crazy things. We've had people say, oh, they really lowered the bar this year, haven't they? Students hear that and won't come. And what does the broader African-American educational community think about your institution? Because we talk and tell stories, and we know people, they went there and they got destroyed. You don't want to go there. And you've got to do reputation cleanup. And my department had to do that for a while. And then what level of intensity is your group putting into this recruitment? So some inclusive strategies. I'm going to tell you our secrets. Since I'm actually leaving Georgia Tech, I can share the secrets with you all. One of the first things we did, every recruiting team, when they have the grad student night out, then what do? They say, oh, let's take everybody to a pub. I don't drink beer, okay? So whenever you want me to go to this pub, that is not my scene, okay? I like cocktails, Carter knows this, right? But some people don't drink. Some people like all kinds of things. So your students are individuals. So we have on our selection when they're RSVPing for the weekend, what do you want to do when you come to Atlanta? Do you want to go to an LGBT bar club, a neighborhood hangout, pop music, pub, R&B, hip hop dancing, salsa dancing? And the students then get to select, and then we can take them to the area that they want to see in the city so they can see themselves there during their graduate program. But then the similarity attraction effect, this is part of the D&I training I do also, right? We like others, we select others who are like us. We like working with those who are like us. It's a human trait. But people that are different face an uphill battle. So when you get to recruiting week and you're like, everybody's gonna mingle. Get to know the professors, they're here, the grad students are here, just mingle. Networking. Except when you look around and the Black and brown students are not in the mix, they don't want to bust into this table or this room of this cluster of white folks to talk to the professor. You have to notice that. And it's not easy for other people to do that. We're all nerds and we're all socially awkward as well. So we started to do this thing called engineering natural interactions, okay? Where we actually force mix the crowd so that all the students get to be with professors and people they want to talk to. So this is one of my examples. We have this event at Fernbank where you see the dinosaurs, and we have our colored, our numbered tables, and I have on their name tags, unbeknownst to the research participants, 2 numbers. And then when the time is announced, we have them switch numbers. What does that do? Some of them end up at the table with a professor that they didn't get a one-on-one interview with. That's me, sorry. That they didn't get a one-on-one interview with because of time, but that they know they want to get in touch with. But also we have demographic groups. The first time we did this, we had 9 Black women all at one table together, and they were looking around like, are you serious? And the point was, if you all come, you will all be in graduate school together. And that's the year that 8 out of the 10 showed up. And so there's other ways you can do this and think about what might work for you. But again, and I'll say this one more thing too, when we did it with when we finally had enough Black men that were there, it was crazy. They were all together at this one table for like a 20-minute period. And they were like, you know, people can see us sitting here together. Yeah, that's fine. We value that in our department because the white students are sitting together, the Indian students are sitting together, the Chinese, we can all sit together. And there's enough of us here that we can do that. So the other food for thought as I close out, how do you deal with costs to attend the weekend? Do you make them pay it up front? Do you have a nice way to allow them to get paid by the department? How much diversity and personal lifestyle interests are addressed because they're going to be there during their formative years? And again, number 3 is important. How much attention to food choices is provided? Food, everybody doesn't eat it. A lot of people don't eat pork. A lot of people don't eat other kinds of things. So think about these balances. And vegetarian, it can look vegetarian to you, but a vegan eats very differently than a vegetarian, and they want good options, not the special vegan table all the way over to the side. All of those things show that you are caring about the fullness of these students. So these are my 5 boundary conditions. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Manu, giving us, again, your perspective here, especially from the department level and recruitment. Next speaker is David Weiner. He's here and he's Executive Vice President, Director, the Wistar Institute Vaccine and Immunotherapy Center, Professor of the Wistar Institute Immunology, Microenvironment and Metastasis Program, and the W.W. Smith Charitable Trust Professor in Cancer Research. And again, he's going to give us a perspective and supporting our students, our underrepresented minority students. So, David.
Oh, thank you, Treena. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. I guess this was a very hard talk to give. It's like, what is the goal that I could impart? And I guess, so I decided what I normally do in those situations is I ask the trainees what they would think, how has the way their career been? And I think that is really what I would say is the overriding thing I'd like to leave us with. The idea of recruiting is to actually create careers. It's not, it doesn't end when they graduate. It isn't about them graduating. If they don't have careers, they haven't really grown the whole institution. They haven't grown themselves and they haven't grown us, and they're not, and then basically we haven't done our job. So that is kind of the way I approach trainees in the lab, that it's really about the long term, not just being in the lab. And so I sent the emails doing this, and after a lot of people from the group said interesting things about this, I put together some of the comments from different people. I didn't, of course, include, I just chose so there wouldn't be redundancy and stuff like that. So on this slide, we're talking about 2 relatively recent. They left both within the just around the start of the pandemic. Megan Wise, who's now Senior Director of Global Regulatory Head at Merck, and Lumina Lewis, These are both Penn students. I've been at Penn and Wistar for 30 some odd years. And these are some of their edited comments. So Lumina's cellular therapy program lead at Nemo Therapeutics and works on cancer. And so find a lab that the area of research is exciting to you and they're doing diverse projects. There will likely be long nights and many failed experiments, but use the energy to build up what you learn. Choose a lab not just for the subject, but also for the technical novelty and diversity of technologies they use. Don't pick a lab based on just the current people. Check who was there before and how they relate to the lab now. That I do think is a good point, because then you can know about sort of the lab culture going forward and how vested they are. And important thing to look, just because they say positive things doesn't mean I'm any of these people. Let's just keep that, straight here, okay? This is what they're saying now, maybe, and they have done a lot of work on me. Who will offer you the chance to give a big talk, to run the collaborator meeting, share the light with you? I actually think these are really important things. It's very important for students and trainees to be pushed and to be put in positions where they have to show leadership. Many students are not ready to do that right away, but if you can get them over that, that really helps them relax. And if they relax, they become a very, very efficient and they can have much more success in their careers because they're not as nervous. And mentors should listen, right? One size does not fit all. And about university, look for a university that supports diversity programs. We just heard two great talks about that. It has a record of advancing all trainees' careers. I do think making sure you have funding in place for trainees is critical. University mechanism for student leadership are critical, and postdoctoral leadership, all trainees. So this is a different group, just some of the people. So actually these two got married. They were both in the lab. Tara, both MD PhDs, Tara and Michael Chadigan, both were, truly exceptional students, trainees, clinicians. I didn't ruin either of them, and they still both talk to me. And Tara, when we were doing this, she got all excited because she had her first New England Journal of Medicine paper as close to senior author on a program she leads at Biomarin. They were both faculty at Johns Hopkins after being here. Michael was here, and she was at Jefferson at that point before moving to these joint positions. So Michael Chadigan is director of clinical research at Vir Pharma. He didn't need really a mentor. He had about 14 papers by the time he left the lab. So the mentor should let the mentee lead discussion regarding their work. It's hard to grow when someone else is giving you all the answers. That's they did this together, but that sounds like Tara, exactly. Meeting check-ins should allow the mentee time to think and get work done on the project, not push them. But we should push them from the comfort zone and allow them to develop leadership. A training environment where everyone's contribution should be valued. That's everyone in the lab. You have to meet the group where they are. And then the last thing is value meritocracies that reward results rather than seniority or other factors. So everyone can play a part, and it's really important to try to figure out the best way so that they can play the best part. And so Tanya, I was honored by all these people to have some of them in all of them in the lab. So Tanya was in the lab when she was very junior. She now is global franchise head of AstraZeneca. We all appreciated her work during the pandemic, right? ChAdOx, the AZ adenovirus vaccine was especially important in the developing world. That we had, different products that helped to cover the world. There was never enough product and saved millions and millions of lives. And then she also her group has really also pioneered antibodies, long-term antibodies for vaccines instead of vaccines. And the nirsevimab is an incredible result last year for children with respiratory syncytial virus, and probably will have 3 new products this year in that space, a vaccine by Pfizer, this product, as well as GSK's for elderly individuals. And also development of Evishield, which was a dual long-lasting antibody on the same technology for preventing at-risk unvaccinatable people. In her personal focus is to explore the potential for new vaccines and therapies for the world's most vulnerable populations. And if you look at her list of things she's done, World Bank, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, PAHO, WHO, it's clear that she has continued to stay where she started. And this was her project. I put up the cartoon. She was one with Bin Wang and few other people in the lab. She helped us report the first time a nucleic acid immunization, and now we just had the success of the mRNA vaccines, was used for developing antibodies and T cells against HIV. And the statement here is an inclusive, diverse, safe space, a challenging environment essential to developing leaders in science. And then these are some current trainees put together. Everyone should be vested in the success of the lab and the lab members because everyone contributes. There should be shared goals. Lab happy hours and activities, game night, painting night, all these things are really central because they allow co-workers to become friends, and they also build a long-term support network because these people are going to want to work with people and they need a foundation, everyone. I don't know, that was an inappropriate word, I didn't mean it that way, but I meant people in your lab. So then the members of the lab all come from diverse backgrounds, making the atmosphere of the lab dynamic, inclusive, and creative. Creativity requires diversity. The lab exhibits and teaches work-life balance as part of its culture. We spend a lot of time discussing that issue as a group. We spend a lot of time about different challenges for genders in that regard. And I've learned a lot through those discussions. And having collaborations with not just academic, but industry and public-private partnerships that these people are involved, that all your people are involved in, provides growth opportunities for the way the world is coming now. And yeah, so I'm gonna have two more students I'm gonna talk about. Both are very more recent. Mamadou is the most recent, but I thought because so Mamadou came to work just during the pandemic. He was looking to increase his CV to help him with his application for graduate school. And he's now at Cornell and Rockefeller working in tumor immunotherapy. And he has enormous energy. And one of the other things he did, which I thought is great to point out here, is he's one of the co-authors on this paper that just came out in February 2023, just about a week or so ago, Black and Cancer, 2 years of empowering the next generation. And there's Mamadou in the lab up in the upper right-hand corner, and there he is a part of a diversity 50 conference interview. And this is always, you know, this is part of discussions that go on in the lab that help people grow. And it was started by Dr. Henderson and Bonner. I put blue around them. And basically it's built around the observation that people of color are overrepresented in disease mortality, but underrepresented in research. And that's the simple background. And you can read this article. I'm not going to go through it, but they've raised several $1 million and they're really dedicated to training. And Mamadou, you know, just like he always was lab, he gave a very great list of the things that we should be focused on, invest in long and short-term careers, provide opportunities in the lab to supplement your training period with writing grants, reviews, and manuscripts, and check if alumni of the lab still come back to visit. And there should be at university specific funding for historically underrepresented groups. And the last person is someone who, just like all of us, were very influenced by the politics the last few years. And he pioneered really delivery of antibodies by non-replicating plasmids inside cells, inside living animals. And this was one of his papers on making a dengue vaccine this way. But he decided he's now at the Vera Institute for Justice, and his goal there is transparency and prosecution, advancing racial equity, and ending mass incarceration. And Saliki, very simple, these are the things he has always talked, working and living for justice and equity improves our science, our careers, our lives, and our community. So I don't think there's any better to work on, to end on than that. So thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, David. All right, so now we're going to have more of a discussion, and I have some questions, and then we're going to open it up, okay, to the audience, and then also online there. I'd like to thank you all again for your great talks and kind of getting everything started and really providing some very nice insight into really strategies here about what we can do. And so I guess one of the first questions is, and I think this is probably even more geared towards the challenges that we have as a center, right, is you've mentioned a number of success stories here, you know, but I guess, can you expand on that a little bit in terms of how we may apply this to centers, which are non-degree, you know, we're non-degree granting institutions. So PIs from many institutions, many departments may have some bearing, you know, things that they're dealing with in terms of how they bring students in. So any recommendations there of how to get, you know, PIs a little more engaged and how centers can really do these things? And anyone can answer, whoever wants to go first. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a great question for the centers, right? And so one of the things that I would say that's an easy low bar is about sending professors and faculty from the centers to those minority research conferences. So that's how I would bring people with me, and the center has funds for their diversity and outreach. And so that could pay for the trip to the conference. But as well as that, then once you have the students for your RAU programs, have them submit abstracts for those minority research conferences as well. So then there's just this presence of your center signs on the posters and hopefully winning, and at the oral talks that then other students get to see. And then once you have the faculty and together, it becomes just like, oh, these people are really out here. And that has been a way to help recruit them to your center schools. Then what is the other challenge is you have to then put them on a project for the center. Because if you recruit them to the institution, that's great, but then your numbers don't change if they're not on a center-related project. That's some of the things that we've come across with our own centers. So faculty need to be that forward-minded in that way.
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of, I think, just building on that, it's very important to try to follow where people go and provide advice and guidance or whatever you know, to sort of help them as they keep going, as people continue through their careers, because we all have challenges. We need a network, right? And the people at your university training or your postdoc, not just your lab, but those other groups we've talked about, are all your network, your safe space, right? You're writing in papers, and you need critiques. You need critiques from a fair broker, those kind of things. And so I think charting that helps us better look out for the people that came out of our groups and continue to develop. And you know, that is it's actually very good for the PI, right? Because they have a long-term relationship too. So, you know, you can collaborate with people 10 years down the road, and so it's just everybody wins that way.
Amy, if you
I've found our centers in these interdisciplinary degrees, while they themselves don't grant degrees, they, in mines anyway, tend to be the most attractive for really talented and very diverse groups. So I would say, you know, is there something that's unique about your center and your collaborative research that you can and should, right, be touting as like your talking points that one will help students get excited about being there? And then the other suggestion I have is we often coach all sorts of groups, departments, but also our centers and our interdisciplinary research programs through establishing a code of conduct. And code of conduct, it might sound harsh, but they're not. They're really, it's almost like expectations. And so it's never too late to start one. They're always great to do at the beginning of a grant or project, but the code of conduct that can say we all agree to do these things. So if I'm a PI affiliated with this project, one of the things I agree to do is to bring these best practices in minimizing bias into my grad student committee. I agree to do these other things that we might think of as institutional, but I hear what you're saying in that it's hard because your departments at all sorts of institutions, universities. One of the things you could do is just put that expectation on all the partners at your center that they're the ones starting to bring that and drive that at their different departments and their universities. The other thing, I don't know if you do this, but our centers are really good about offering fellowships and sometimes top-off fellowships too. And those can help your faculty with incentives for recruitment.
Thank you. Yeah, and okay. Another question is also then, again, some of these strategies are great. Manu, I heard, again, Georgia Tech and some of the very large institutions have a little more resources to do these fabulous weekends and to bring students in. And, you mentioned some of the smaller institutions also still trying to boost their numbers. And these may be minority serving institutions that have good numbers at the undergraduate, but are not getting them at the graduate level. Again, what strategies can we do there for the less resourced institutions, again, to try to attract some of these underrepresented groups to their graduate programs?
Ooh. Give me an example of a less resource institution, because it's not.
Mines is one. I will say everyone says
that
that about Mines, right? Nobody thinks of Mines as like an MIT where we have a huge endowment because we don't.
And this can be financially or even administratively, even departments, you may not have the administration to kind of do a lot of this outreach networking. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's something we've prioritized. We don't have a lot of resources. We're very lean at Mines. We don't have a lot of money to do things, but we're competing. We recognize that we're competing with places like, we went out and looked at them, like CMU, who is doing this incredible grad visit day that it might sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. These students get like iPads, they're getting this huge experience. And so while we can't give iPads, we have worked with the deans and the provost because we want to be competitive. And we all the departments are putting in to do a grad visit day where we pay for the students to come to campus. As Manu suggested, we put together a quality experience that's very thoughtful about making sure that we're welcoming diverse people from all walks of life, right, into this day. And so we don't have a lot of money, but we realize in order to be competitive, we've got to do stuff like that. So I would say you need to get the top folks, right? You need to get the DHs together. You need to get on the provost's ear, all the other big center directors, and say, this is important and we'll be part of it, but it's got to be a university-wide organized thing, so that we're all chipping in money to make it happen and we're all chipping in the resources to make it happen.
And so I would also to say that be strategic about the application pool. So of course, people on my admissions committee, they think we're the best department in the world and everybody should come to us. So they want to compete with all the students from MIT, Hopkins, and UC Berkeley and UCSF. Well, the students from UC Berkeley and UCSF don't come to Georgia Tech because they're not coming from the West Coast to the South. So we invite all of them and fly them all from California to Atlanta thinking we're going to get at least one out. We've wasted money. And so part of it had to be, hey, we're not going to invite all those students, right? And maybe we missed the one that would have come, but we have to be strategic. And so we're located in the South. We get excellent students from Duke, Vanderbilt, and some of the HBCUs around there. And so think about, if your resources are limited, where do you get the bang for your buck? And it's about kind of humbling the faculty about, yeah, it'd be great. But even in us, we're again, number 2 in the country. We look at those that we've accepted. Out of our top 25 that have been ranked by a department, we maybe get 3. And so, but in the next 30 through 50, we're doing pretty good. But from 60 to 120, we're really doing better. So think about how much money you have to spend and be very strategic about how to spend it, I would say. And with the virtual options now, that opens up a whole lot. So this year we're kind of doing both for some students who can come or some students who choose not to come. Then you actually do get to reach more and you have to think about making a quality virtual experience. And that saves everyone money.
Manu, that's fantastic. I just want to re-emphasize what you said. Those are all great suggestions, and it's all about the data, right? You don't understand who your pipeline schools are and how to figure out which students are more likely to say yes to you if you're not tracking the data. So definitely do what Manu said.
I'm just going to jump a little bit to the data. Collecting data is important. Making decisions can be data driven. And I think when it comes to the diversity data and looking at these things, so, and especially for centers then, and like I said, we're complex again with the numbers of institutions, numbers of departments. So you say, and I think Amy, you mentioned set goals. And so how do we, even like I said, institutions, departments, how do we look at the data? How are we setting goals? What goals should we be in terms of numbers? How do you figure out what those numbers are? Either again, based on what are we trying to do better than national data? Are we trying to do better again, based on your demographics, I guess, of your institution? Like, how are you setting these goals?
I'll answer this again. Again, when I was chair of admissions and recruiting, again, I used to piss off the associate chair. I used to say, if we invited 90 students to the weekend, I wanted 100% to say they were coming to Georgia Tech. He was like, we can't place all those students. Well, listen, my job is to get them all to come here. Your job is to place them in the lab. So, when the student asked me the same thing, like, should I go for a 3.2 this semester? Go for the 4.0. That's the highest you can get. So I'm not the best person to answer this because I'm not data lady, because I want everyone that we invite to come.
And as someone who works at in upper administration, I love that attitude, right? Because I've worked with leadership to set what we would call realistic goals. So, you mentioned some ways that you might set those goals. And it's looking at your historic data, because obviously you want to do better than your historic data. So there's your baseline and benchmark. You want to look at your peer institutions. Most of us have peer institution or aspirational institutions, and perhaps as a center, you might have some peer aspirational centers that you might want to look at. What are they doing? How well are they doing? Of course, you talked about some data, the national data, and that's again, maybe a baseline or a bare minimum. And then looking at your pool, you want to be reasonable about what's possible. So, and then you want to stretch it. I promote stretching it a bit. Some folks are like, nope, let's just stick with what's reasonable based on the pool and where we think we can get so we can achieve it. But I want to see people like Manu who are pushing that what's reasonable so that we're doing better. So we look at Mines, we look at the pool of college-bound, basically the eligible population to be recruited. And one of our goals is to match the demographics of our state so that everyone in the university within departments, we're reflective of the diversity of our state, and our state's quite diverse. We have over 20% Hispanic students who are coming to college these days. So we have a lot of big numbers to hit, and we're trying to match our state. That's 50%, 51 or 52% women. We're not there, but that's where we'd like to be.
So one of the things I think has been very popular with trainees is the summer programs before they're actually accepted in the graduate programs or medical school. And those really give two shots, right? They get to see the place first, and they also get to, it really is beneficial to the student or the trainee because they also get their CV increased, which makes them more attractive as well, having those kind of experiences. So that's one of the things that can help. And they also then are familiar with the campus and the culture. So that's another thing that I've heard, that the trainees like.
Okay, I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about more, or ask some questions about supporting the students. And, one of the things I think, again, David, in particular, you were talking about, it was interesting how you were able to get your former students to give you comments. They're willing to talk to you about things, and they, appreciated I'm sure appreciated you as an advisor. You're being kind of modest up there. So I have questions.
Very annoying.
And this can be to all. You're a mentor. I guess, do you provide or encourage mentorship beyond just you mentoring? And so this is really a question to everyone in supporting the trainees. And so this can be, whatever strategies you guys take. And then how are those relationships initiated and structured?
So I think it's been very important to be following up, figuring out where people are, but also training people to do that. And when you recruit junior faculty as well, right, that they are not sure how to build their labs and not sure how to have their own network. So those discussions are important across the board so that you start to build a community that way, and you start to make and I also think I think one of the real important things about this whole discussion is having the whole university community engaged and aligned, because it's going to improve everybody's research and everybody's programs to see that you're just sort of helping move everybody's careers along, I think is fundamental to this, and changes the environment, and it makes people more comfortable and those type of things. So I think it sort of should be important at different faculty levels to also encourage them or have them understand that the network, the student or trainee is not there. You're there for each other. They're going to be in your lab a short period of time, but the impact is a lifetime. And so they can view it that way. You don't know where somebody's going to go. You don't know where somebody's going to wind up on. And those connections, just like everything else in our life, can be really changing.
Anybody else in terms of, besides you as a mentor, or the other structures or things that you may do in your labs?
So one thing that I've heard, and I encourage my own students to do, and I do it myself, is to have your own board of directors, right? Because the PI, as David, we can't be all things to all students because we are who we are. But I like the idea, again, as he said, keep in touch with all your former trainees, but then the trainees should keep up with all of their previous mentors, right? Because then they have learned different things from them. They know you at different stages, and they maybe even understand how you work a little bit. And your PI will have different motivations for asking you to do something or driving you one way. And another person can give you a different viewpoint on that, particularly, again, with their own motivation. And so I said you can bring in more people into the fold if you have these genuine conversations. And what a friend of mine also said too is I go seek advice from anyone, but consider the source, because that person's perspective is what is helping drive that information. So think about how that applies to how you do it. So I'm always encouraging my student, and if we have an argument or something in the office, I'm like, okay, this is my take. Go and ask somebody else and see what they say, and let's come back and talk about it.
I will just give a comment that I normally have in the lab, which is I usually tell the trainees, well, faculty are delusional and we lie because we think things are one way but the other way. So you really have to, the most important people for your careers are the other students, the other trainees who can help give you the true story. And so that is the network of people around you that are important to help you grow. I think that's a great comment. No one person matters. I mean, they all matter. They all matter. No one person, no one person alone is the solution. That's right. Yeah, I'm from Brooklyn. I always.
Wait,
that language stuff is not. English is not the first language.
Amy, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah. Again, coming from the institutional perspective, we recognize that our grad students sometimes don't feel like the professional societies that we have fit for them anymore. Think about SWE as the ship, and some of those professional societies have at Mines anyway, and across the nation do have grad sort of sections, but for us at Mines, it's most of the grad students, it doesn't fit for them. And so what we've done is we've created what we call Mines Community Alliances. And they're modeled after ERGs or BRGs, employee resource groups that industry uses. It used to be called affinity groups, like 10 or 15 years ago. But basically, these community alliances are for faculty, staff, and grad students to come together around shared identities. So at Mines, we have a Black MCA, Mines Community Alliance, a Latinx, LGBTQ, Asian, and a Women's MCA. And the grad students seem to find more connections with folks in those groups because everyone's an adult for the most part there, as opposed to an undergrad student who has a different experience. So we've purposely invested in those groups, like we give them budget, we give them support, so that they have another place, to go to create or find a community that might be harder to find, especially, at Mines, like 8 years ago, we had like one female Black PhD student, right? That was it. And so like, there's no other Black PhD students to even connect with, let alone, right? Figure out how to get outside of your lab and meet people. So we've formed these groups to help make those connections.
So I'll open it up now. Let's take some from the audience, and then we'll go. You have questions online as well. I think that's, she's giving me to read. Oh, perfect. Okay.
This is a question for Amy. So you had mentioned that you have some ways of minimizing inter-observer variability in your interviews. And you also mentioned something about how asking whether personal contact with, say, a given faculty member is required for students. And those are both sort of minimizing the second and maximizing the first are strategies that you have. And I wonder if you could just give us some more details about those.
Sure. So we use a strategy called inter-rater reliability. It's a social science research method, actually, that basically goes through a process of training the various people who are evaluating applications on coming to consensus and agreement on how we're going to score. It helps them talk through their own biases, and it recognizes we practice scoring applications with the teams. And it helps them see who's an outlier on which criteria. And then, they have to recognize this is my job here. And my job is not to be an outlier in scoring these candidates. My job is to be fair and consistent with the committee. And then, that person has to, part of that process is knowing that they're scoring like the rest of the committee. So we do a whole long series of workshops on it with our admissions teams. And we have a shorter workshop where we do this with our graduate admissions committees. So that's just a brief summary of IRR, inter-rater reliability, as we apply it to admissions really quickly. Another thing we do with the teams is, and many grad committees we find don't use rubrics, or if they do, they're unrealistic rubrics. I think we reviewed one with a team, and they were scoring out of 100, and and we were like, how can you figure out a reasonable score that's going to be consistent when you have 0 to 15 points to give for this one criteria? What does 1 mean versus 14? And they were like, oh, that's a good question. I don't know. It's not like a homework assignment, So we work with them through their existing process and try to help them infuse these other elements that we know will minimize the bias. And then what was the second question? Can you help me? I forgot already.
Question was the issue of personal contact.
Oh, yeah. So that's, again, part of our workshop. We don't have mandates or requirements there. We just ask people to review their processes, and a lot of grad programs, they encourage students to reach out to a faculty member, right? And the one faculty member and that one point of contact is like their first experience, and whether or not they're ignored or whether or not they get a lukewarm message really influences whether or not they're even going to pursue exploring other programs, other faculty members. And so we work with our departments on emphasizing how important it is to respond. There's research out there that tells us that international students and students with names that don't sound white are far less likely to simply get an email response from a faculty member. And the quality and tone of that email response, if they get it, is also very different, just based on their email address and the sound of their name. So we work with departments on here's a template, right? If nothing else, just have everybody send a similar response to the candidates that uses the language that we promote as here's how we talk about minds, here's how we talk about the department, that's positive in nature. And then if again, evaluating the program, some of our programs, all the students come through like a staff member who is well qualified, right, to give good responses, and then manages the conversations with those students. So again, it's understanding your process, and grad admissions is different in every department, even at Mines. We've tried to help folks infuse best practice, but it's still a little bit different in every place. And so, we want to just minimize those points where, as you heard from Manu, students are getting lukewarm or not great responses. We want all those students to be interested in learning more about Mines and maybe not getting turned off by one particular interaction or non-interaction with someone who doesn't respond to them. So I hope I answered that question.
And can I add something controversial to the mix? So the data is important, but I think it's also, one must be careful that just going straight with the numbers and saying these are all the decisions made by the numbers, because it's a great way to exclude people and to say, well, this is why we don't have any Black applicants or candidates again. This is why we don't have any women again. Look at the scores. So I think they're great to use, but then it's also what we have, as you mentioned, multiple reviews. We have like 3 people review the applications. And if we have discrepant scores, we don't need everyone to agree on the score. But when we have wildly discrepant scores, then we have a discussion together in the committee where the people explain why their scores are so different. And we'll let the rest of the committee begin to ask questions, because maybe somebody saw something that somebody else didn't. Somebody had a bias that they don't even recognize was, and they said this, they missed it. And then that starts to get at some of the richer conversations about what do we really think about this person. But if I were just to add the numbers and go, we would be screwed. And I give another example of this. Again, I turned over admissions to a well-trained colleague of mine. And last year when we had done the scores, we had primed the committee, oriented them, done the bias training, et cetera. But when the numbers were coming back in from the reviews, I was looking at the numbers. So that's what the data was really helpful. And I was like, and I put together a really rough, regression. Black students, same GPA, were getting lower scores from our committee across the board. Hispanic students, same GPA, lower scores from our committee. And we pride ourselves on we're so trained and so open, and all the committee members are looking at these things. The numbers were telling us, but it's still there. And so that's where it was like, we now have to have this discussion and look at what's actually happening. And so I say, get the data, look at it, and then be realistic about what are we going to do here. But be fair about how you make that decision. And with the committee, everybody's on board.
All right. There's a number of questions online, so I'm going to touch on some of these. One I think has already been covered here. So here's a question. Thank you for 3 very interesting and different talks. An interesting aspect of the event so far has been that each of you focused on the importance of a different stage of the recruitment process, from applying to reviewing to recruiting to supporting postgraduate careers. What about earlier time points? What advice do you have for building our reputation and impact even before students begin graduate and postdoctoral applications?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have, summer programs, to have senior high school programs. It helps people build their resumes. It helps you to know, see how they're doing. They decide if they're going to like this type of environment or not. And so it works many ways. Also, they get familiar with your campus and the type of thing that goes on in science. And so it just works in many different ways to help with recruiting, development, and strengthening applicants. You can also in those times, you get to look at people's CVs and say, well, this maybe I would say focus on this. Many, junior people have very different ideas about what the process is really going to be like. And so a mentor at that stage can, or even the other students and stuff, can say, well, this is what I did. And so they also get role models.
Yeah. And I think, think about one of the things that Amy said about there was the one, I think, female PhD student. Is that what she said? One female or one Black female? But when there was just one. So for example, with B and me, we're getting going. We didn't have a lot of Black students, right? And So then what you have to do is you have to borrow from other places across campus. So if there was the one female PhD student, and say one Black female PhD student, I would then borrow from undergrads, Black female undergrads, that when we bring them to campus, if they can talk about being a PhD, they could tell you what it's like to be a Black female at this institution. So what we were doing when we were having our recruiting weekend and there were no Black students, we were borrowing from mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. They come to this wonderful event, they get a free meal. All students still love free food, but they also knew we're trying to bring in more students. And so they felt I can be a part of that mission by coming. Then now that BME has these large numbers, we share our students with other departments, especially aerospace, and so that they can then at least get the questions answered of the recruits. So that helps change the reputation. Because what it used to be, if one person came in, they were like, there are no Black grad students? Isn't this Atlanta? And that would scare the students off, right? So that's where we began to change our reputation by having more students around. Then the other big thing I'll say too, gets to hit what he was mentioning about programs. We started a high school research program for Black students from Atlanta, so they come work in Georgia Tech labs. It changes what the face looks like when people come walking into the buildings. They're not grad students, but everybody's not asking those questions. And then people begin to feel like, oh, they care more. And that helped change our reputation.
Go with another question here. So how can we attract students, again, underrepresented minority students, as many come from poor financial backgrounds to jobs like PhDs that are less financially rewarding? That gives, okay, I'm trying to read this carefully. That gives privileged people the upper hand, as they can afford a low-paying PhD program if they have generational wealth. A poor underrepresented minority student would always go for jobs outside of academia, which pay better. Okay. So, well,
I'll jump in here first. So that is a perspective. I'm not sure. Okay. I'm not sure that's true across the board. What I have seen, and when I started my PhD, I was like, what? I'm getting paid for school? Y'all are gonna pay me this much just to be in school. When in my undergrad, I was paid nothing and was working jobs. So there's a different personality. And then what I've seen with some of our students, the ones who complain about the PhD stipends are the well-off students. Those that come from lower backgrounds are like, I can make this work, because they're not trying to live in the most fancy apartment right by campus and try to live the life. I've seen some of our poor students, they don't have cars, they take the public transportation, and they're like, I'm saving money. This is amazing. It is the ones who have this expectation that are now pushing this narrative, this is not enough for me to live on. And again, a way I also see that in Atlanta, we're paying our students $35,000, right? Atlanta has a low cost of living compared to other US cities. There are whole families in Atlanta. Some of them are high school families I was talking about that live on less than $35,000 a year. So it is a choice to say that the stipend is unlivable, and not that everybody should live that way, but I hear the complaints more from the well-off students than from the poor students.
Yeah, same, Manu, same at our institution. We've also we're very high cost of living, and we've been very thoughtful about our housing. So we make sure that we have grad student housing, postdoc housing that's not market value, because it's so expensive to live where we are. And we also, we across the institution have minimum standards, so we don't have anyone making really low amounts as a PhD student, and we're not quite at the, what is it, the NSF GRFP is 37 or something now. Not everyone's there, but we really encourage folks to be like, for regular PhDs, right, that we're paying those stipend rates, not like $12,000 a year. Like we can't do that.
a couple more questions. Oh, yeah, let me jump to the audience then here. Go ahead. Yeah, you had your friend.
Leverage the community around us to help build diversity in our center and in our R&D.
Oh, the question was, how do we bring the community involved and for the centers to try to increase the diversity of the center and the university? So it's really about bringing the community around your institution. Did I capture that correctly? Okay.
Well, I think it, the only thing I can say it this way, we have, there was a high school program established at Wistar on the Penn campus, right? And that is for getting high school students to the next level. So they come in and they get trained. And so that's one of the type of outreaches. I think you talked about local colleges and all that programs. I think that type of thing, I think also having a, mentorship in the community is really a good way for directing people back to, these centers. So those are just a few things.
Yeah, it's a really great question, right? Especially in a urban environment like Philly and just like Atlanta. And one thing, again, going back a little bit to the data, is we found Atlanta public school students were not applying to Georgia Tech. And we are right in the heart of Atlanta. We're in Midtown Atlanta. There's all those schools around us. They were not applying. And again, getting that data from undergrad admissions. Why? They're like, that's not a place for us. And we're a public school, right? That's not a place for us. So that's where, again, we had to change our reputation. How do we make these students feel like this is a place for them? Because we're such a low cost for education too in the state of Georgia. And that is why we first began to go to the high schools to get them to come and visit campus, right? We're bringing them on for like on-campus demos, which NSF centers were great. We started our high school research program from our STC. Actually, those funds were used. So first you start bringing them around, and then a larger number where they start to get comfortable in the space. And then there's enough that keep coming around that everybody else isn't like, oh my God, they're gonna rob us when they show up, right? And so then it starts to change on both ends. And then we began the program where they started to come regularly and then begin to feel like they belong in the space, and then that their families belong in the space. And it's not a quick process, but that slow part where then they start to feel comfortable and everybody's feeling comfortable and the whole community comes around when we have their big events. Then they start to be like, now our students are like, oh, I'm clearly Georgia Tech is my backup school now. What? It's not. Stop. It's a hard school. But that is, I think, people have to be intentional. And I think Penn is right here in the middle. Your center wants to do that work. Just bring the bodies on campus and let everybody start to acclimate to that. Super important.
This is more a retention question than a recruitment question. But in my department, there is kind of a group of students and faculty and staff that formed a committee over the last 3 years, and we do a lot of workshops on microaggression and implicit bias. We do social activities to try to get people in the department to keep mixing and mingling and meeting each other. Book clubs to talk about, race, sexual identities, gender bias, things like that. But when we survey the people in our department, we still see that people are suffering from microaggressions. There's tensions. Like, we're kind of, what more should we do? I don't know if you have experience, like the people that need to be part of these conversations often don't volunteer to be part of them. And if it's mandated that is a department thing, they might not be, opening to listen, right? So I don't know if you have experience with similar things.
I'm gonna answer it. I'm just the moderator. Go ahead, you guys answer. That's a tough one.
I'm gonna dive with you a bit. Dr. Arinzeh and I were discussing this a bit at lunch. She is a pioneer. She has come through her career being the first. And I have in many stages of my career, the first. Well, I won't say sweet. It makes me a bit of a jerk about some of these things, right? Okay, so what I think you have to do is have the students, I would suggest, and what we've done at our institution, have the students build community with each other to support themselves. We can try to change the old dogs, and we are trying, like you said, all these workshops and things, and we're trying to mandate it, and at least trying to get it. I feel like sometimes you can't change people's hearts, but at least if you stop their mouth from saying it, then we're still better off, right? And so that is what we are working on with the old dogs. But I think for the younger people who expect it to be a utopia, it's not. It's not. I mean, that's all I can say. And we came up through hellfire and burning, right? And we're still kind of in it. But I think it's on us also to be honest that we still face all of those same things and experience all of that same things, even as accomplished professors, right? And so it can be a bit disheartening when talking to a student like, yeah, that doesn't go away from me. I get it. Yeah, you're in it now. That person said that to me at the faculty meeting, and I had to pull them aside and correct them. So I think it's about, I do a workshop on assertiveness training, because everybody's a human being. No one has the right to disrespect you. And even a student with a professor, even if it's their own PI, there's a way you can have an assertive, respectful conversation about what was inappropriate about what was being said. And what I always hear all the time, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Just so you know for next time. I can forgive it. Oh, you didn't know, great. Because a lot of people don't know things. And I make mistakes when I'm talking to other communities and groups. And hopefully they will correct me and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. And now I know for next time. But once you know for next time, now you're making choices. And we can talk about those choices outside.
I think that was really good. But the only thing I would sort of emphasize, I would also emphasize one particular point from that. That is, it's very important to have the student groups and to realize they're just as empowered as the faculty. It can't be top down that the faculty wins. It shouldn't be on your graduate committees. There's it can't be that the PI is basically the Lord and Master type thing. It has to be a balance, and the committee's role there should be to support the student, and the committee in general should be judged that way, not specifically what the PI wants. And it should be separated from whatever money or anything the PI brings in. It's really not about that. And also, I mean, we spend, a lot of time, it's not easy, all the things that have been going on in the news, and it's not recent, and it comes back wave after wave. This is, I feel like one of the big discussions the last 3 years has been, I just can't believe I'm back where I was when I was a teenager, and we talked about that a lot in the group. But the point about that is that helps those kind of discussions, and the students having strength and the trainees having strength helps them to realize they can get through these things. They're going to come around, and that's part of building their careers. We have to help people to learn how to stand up the right way and learn how they work with a difficult individual, how they work around it, and that will give that person strength, and it won't be when they're in that room, they won't be able to advocate for themselves. So I think it's a challenge, it's a problem. There's also an opportunity in a way if you can get the culture of the group to people feel that they have strength, they can stand up when they need to.
So I'll just add 2 things to that. At Minds, we talk about shared responsibility, and we ask every individual in the Minds community, whether they're a student worker, staff, faculty in any stage of their career, from leaders, to a teaching professor, we ask all of them to find a way to contribute to DEI work on our campus. We ask them to write that down in their annual performance plan. We ask them to have a plan with their supervisor for how they're going to accomplish those goals for the year. And we do that so that we're meeting people where they're at. As you heard Manu say, some people are on the bell curve end of the spectrum where they're a little more recalcitrant or not as educated. And we have some of the folks who've been doing this work, like people, the panelists in front of you, for a long time and are strong advocates. And so we're trying to get everyone to do something. I think you and your student group, I think you all in your center could ask everyone who's engaged with you to do something like that. Make your own commitment and let people figure out where they are with that. That's shared responsibility. We don't ask not just the individuals to do that, but we also ask the groups to do it. So we'll ask a big research group as a group to come up with their commitments to DEI. We ask departments to come up with their commitment to DEI. So we ask it of the individuals, but we also ask it of the collective, the groups. The other thing I'll say is I describe this strategy of how do we get those folks who should be in the room. I hear that all the time, right? Everybody wants to, tell me 3 people who aren't attending these workshops, who aren't participating in these things, who really need to be there because they're like constant microaggressors, or they're the thorn in people's side, or they don't seem to care. And our strategy is really, we look at that bell curve. We look at it as a bell curve. There's the one tail end, a bunch of folks like the people on the panel who've been doing this for a long time. They're on board. They're well educated. There is the other end of the bell curve, people who are recalcitrant, and like maybe even more than recalcitrant, they are like actively working against DEI. But then there's the middle of the bell curve, this huge number of people who are sort of like maybe hadn't quite started getting engaged with this, but they are our potential allies. We're focused our efforts on that big population of people who are potential allies, who have potential to grow, to be allies and advocates in the DEI space. Because when we get them on board, when we get them able to speak up, speak out, be supportive, then that little tail of the folks who are recalcitrant or maybe resistant they're not so loud anymore. Then the norm, right, is that you don't say those things. Like Manu said, they're quiet because it's not appropriate to say those things anymore. So our strategy is really, we're not spending time on that very small percent of people who are never going to, as Manu, what'd you say, change their hearts, right? We're never going to change that, but we can change what they say through culture and through expectations. So that's our sort of how we articulate that strategy, especially to you all. Like, they might be terrible right now. Let their supervisor deal with them. It's not your job to deal with them. We're focused on the folks that are going to make change and impact in our institutions and in our spaces.
Great. Well, I think we are unfortunately out of time, and I think there was great discussion today, great talks today, and great takeaways. So, you know, we want you to do things. So especially even again, our center PIs, please, you know, this is again, a very important part of what we're doing here. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Let's thank the speakers. Panelists. Go ahead.
So
Vivek.
Treena, I really want to thank you. This was absolutely amazing, right? So really, we saw success at the institutional level, you know, a university like Colorado School of Mines, and at the departmental level and a level of PI. So this was absolutely amazing. And I hear that Annie is already getting requests for sharing this. So with your permission, you know, I think the community can benefit from a lot of what we saw, particularly the presentations. You know, clearly there's a roadmap there. And I don't think at the institutional level, every PI is getting the statistics of, you know, at different levels. So, and, you know, in your presentations as well. So thank you very much. And also thanks to Annie and Avery for working with Treena. So thanks a lot. This is amazing.